Okay, let me tell you something. When I first started podcasting, there is no world in which I could have imagined one day having a merch store. But now I'm selling cute little magical overthinkers hats and little thought spiral notebooks, all thanks to Shopify. When I set out to start a merch shop, I was truly at a loss. I didn't know where to turn. It seemed really complicated, but Shopify has made it so simple from my end and the consumer end. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/magical, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/magical now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/magical. I have a lot of anxiety when booking doctor's appointments. I don't like to do it, but ZocDoc has made it really easy for me. I've actually been using it for years. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care to skin care, and much more. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/magical to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/magical. ZocDoc.com/magical. Welcome to the Magical Overthinkers podcast, a show for thought spiralers, exploring the subjects we can't stop overthinking about, from narcissism to doomslaying. If you can relate to the feeling that, despite living in the information age, the world only seems to be making less sense, if you can connect to the idea that for some mysterious reason, it just feels especially hard to exist as a human in the world right now, then you're in the right place. This podcast is here to soften the clash between our innate human mysticisms and the overwhelm of this time, to help us quiet the noise in our brains for a little, or even hear a melody in it. I'm your host, Amanda Montel. Today, we're overthinking about celebrity worship. Before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to remind you listeners that if you prefer to watch your podcasts, full episodes of Magical Overthinkers are available on YouTube. I always record video when I do these episodes. I record in a studio and sometimes at home. And so if you'd like to watch these episodes, I will leave the link in our show notes. I also wanted to mention that if you're enjoying Magical Overthinkers so far, everyone who works on the show, myself included, would really appreciate it if you might consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps the show, especially if you leave 5 stars. Okay, on to overthinking about celebrity worship. One of the very first questions that I set out to try and answer in my book, The Age of Magical Overthinking, had to do with the increase in celebrity fanaticism. What is responsible for the increasingly intense cycles of celebrity worship and dethronement that we're seeing in society these days? I spent months researching that topic, and I came to an answer that I found pretty satisfying, but for some reason, I cannot shake my fascination with this subject. I just keep turning over the stone between my fingers. What is going on with celebrity worship? The answer that I came to had to do with a combination of a few different factors. The first has to do with the fact that young people really are looking up to media figures as role models more than ever. A 2019 Japanese study found that about 30% of adolescents aspire to emulate a media figure, like their favorite singer or athlete. A 2021 study published in the North American Journal of Psychology measured that celebrity worship had increased dramatically since 2 decades prior. And we've always jumped to conclusions about our role models, painting them as more perfect than they probably really are. There was once a time in human history when the only people that you would see or look up to were people that you knew in your small community. You might clock someone in your village with big muscles and jump to the conclusion that they were a skilled fighter, a skilled hunter, and thus would be good to align with for survival purposes. It was an imperfect but overall reasonable assumption to make about them. Today, we do the same thing to our parents and teachers, people that we look up to. Sometimes we deify them. This phenomenon is actually called the halo effect. It's a cognitive bias defined by our tendency to make positive assumptions about a person's overall character based on our impression of one single trait. It is a deeply embedded cognitive inclination. Increasingly, though, we are mapping this cognitive bias onto modern parasocial relationships involving celebrities. And because we don't know these people in real life, it's not only creating these impossible expectations that a celebrity can never fulfill, but because the relationship is one-sided, we can never work through the emotional fallout of that disappointment using tools like in-person conversation and empathy. Here's how the halo effect applies to celebrities. We might see a pop star whose music we enjoy and jump to the conclusion that they must be cultured and educated, perhaps that they care about us as much as we care about them, maybe that their politics align with our values, even though there might be very little evidence to suggest that any of those things are true. Now, again, seeking role models is an evolutionary instinct that we develop to keep us safe. But these role model dynamics are becoming increasingly wonky, especially in the age of social media, which brings us quote unquote closer to our faves than ever. And performative online personas further inflame that existing halo effect, exacerbating the illusion of savior status. Our brains truly have difficulty differentiating an online or media persona from a role model in real life. And this is setting up a lot of fans and the subjects of their fanaticism for psychological failure. Get this. A 2003 survey found that teens who worshipped people that they knew in real life, even to a sort of unreasonable or irrational degree, actually overall had higher self-esteem and educational achievement. But glorifying pop stars and athletes predicted the opposite. Lower confidence, weaker sense of self. All of these dynamics became even more brutal and even more hallucinatory during COVID lockdowns, which increased our needs for connection and guidance. Our increase in social media use made us feel closer to our favorite celebrities than ever, even though those relationships were totally one-sided. Now, there are many positive sides to fandom, no doubt about it. It can provide people with a platform to talk about issues that matter to them, like feminism, race, human rights, etc., through a familiar lens. But there are serious downsides as well. A 2014 clinical examination of celebrity worship concluded that the highest levels of extreme fandom are associated with psychological difficulties, including body image issues, poor interpersonal boundaries, depression, anxiety, gambling, shopping addiction, stalking behavior, and criminality. During times of culture-wide confusion and tragedy, we are increasingly looking to celebrities like musicians to figure out what to believe, what news sources to trust, how to spend our time. We're looking to them as moral guides. I certainly don't have the right answers as to what role celebrities should serve in public or political life. Obviously, if we demand political vocalizations from TV stars and pop stars, the consequences of that can range hugely from Dolly Parton to Donald Trump. On one hand, I think it is perfectly reasonable to expect public figures who have huge influence and wide-reaching platforms to use those platforms for good. And at the same time, I question the pedestals upon which we're uplifting so many of these celebrities. It begs the question, is it reasonable to demand that an entertainer swerve outside their lane to make a public statement about some issue that they have no expertise in? Isn't looking to celebrities as alternative saviors to crooked businessmen and politicians, while reasonable enough on one hand, not how we ended up with our first celebrity president in the form of Ronald Reagan? There seems to be such risk here. Also, I can't help but notice how disproportionately we apply these standards depending on the background and level of privilege of the subject of our fanaticism. Many cultural commentators have observed that female entertainers of color in particular tend to be held to this deified standard that really obliterates their natural human capacity for error and complexity. I think of that example from 2015 where Beyoncé went on Good Morning America teasing this big announcement. And so many of her intense fans were whipped up into this tizzy expecting that she was going to be announcing a new album or maybe a new pregnancy. Instead, she went on the talk show and told the world that she was going vegan. Her superfans were so disappointed that they bullied her mercilessly online just for making a public announcement that wasn't as splashy as they had hoped. I have to wonder if, say, Hugh Jackman exhibited the exact same behavior, if his fans would have reacted so dramatically and caustically. In general, I think the more marginalized a celebrity is, the slimmer their margin for error in the eyes of their fans. Deification and objectification are kind of both equally dehumanizing. And the higher we elevate a celebrity up on that pedestal, the further that they have to fall. This combination of factors, the halo effect, mistrust in institutions, social media, sexism, disconnectedness and loneliness, lack of IRL role models and empathy, COVID, all of these phenomena working together seem to have contributed to this roller coaster of emotional extremes with regard to celebrities and the role that they play in our lives. It's really confusing. To help me parse through some of that confusion, I am delighted to introduce today's special expert guest, Jessica Grose, a New York Times opinion columnist and author of the book Screaming on the Inside: The Unsustainability of American Motherhood. Jessica Grose often covers pop culture, mental health, parenting, wellness, and celebrities. I'm a huge fan of her insights. I quote her a bunch in the age of magical overthinking, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation. Well, Jessica, thank you for doing this. Could you please introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them what you do?
For sure. I am Jessica Grose. I am an opinion writer at the New York Times.
Succinct, and I appreciate that. I truly never thought of myself as someone who would have a merch store. It's so official, but it's been a blast to launch one to pair with this podcast thanks to Shopify. Let me tell you how great Shopify is. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. And whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits or little cute hats that say magical overthinkers, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify has got you covered. This platform helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. I was very intimidated to launch a merch shop. I had all these ideas for cute little t-shirts and hats and stickers, but I really didn't know where to begin. I am so glad that amandamontel.store is a Shopify website. There is clearly a reason why Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from little stores like mine all the way to Allbirds and Brooklinen and millions of other entrepreneurs of truly every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/magical, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/magical now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/magical. I'm going to start out with the very first question that I pose to all of my Magical Overthinkers guests, which is just simply, what is an irrational thought spiral that is currently living rent-free in your head?
Oh, that's a great question. Usually it's what if it all goes down in the United States? Where would we flee? Like that's usually, and I haven't even seen the movie Civil War.
I feel like in nuclear warfare, South Africa might be the best place to be, just in terms of like proximity to Russia and the US. I think about that sometimes.
Yeah, well, I don't think about nuclear winter, although that was a fear I had as a child in the 80s. That was the keeping me up at night.
That was the au courant existential threat.
Yes, but now it's more, will our country immolate itself at some point?
Well, yeah. And then the sun will swallow us all.
Can't wait.
So let's get right into it. We're here to talk about celebrity worship, to try and figure out what's going on. Why does fandom seem to feel so much more hostile and hallucinatory to me now than ever before? Then again, am I mistaken about that? Am I overthinking it? And perhaps unsurprisingly, I want to bring up the example of Taylor Swift. A recent New York Times piece, I don't know if you saw it, by Joe Coscarelli titled, "How Big is Taylor Swift?"
I did see it.
It compared Taylor's fame to that of pre-social media stars like Madonna and the Beatles. And as I understand it, it basically concluded that she does not have the same sort of monocultural impact that those celebrities did. And yet, celebrity worship and parasocial dynamics do seem to be growing more intense somehow. My question for you is, do you think celebrity worship is actually more intense now than it was in the past in some way? And to what historical and societal factors might you credit that?
So, I mean, I think it is often really tough to gauge the depth of belief or intensity of belief because everyone's thoughts are just so much more accessible because of social media. So I did a very short piece earlier this year, and the headline was something like, are there actually more cults, or do we just get a podcast or a documentary about every one of them?
Oops.
The conclusion was like, there's not great evidence that way more people believe in conspiracy theories or arrange their lives around conspiracy theories than were previously, right? We just hear about all of this stuff more. And so there's a performative nature of fandom that we couldn't have before because there was no platform for it. We've all seen the newsreels of girls just absolutely losing their minds over the Beatles, over Elvis. So I think it would actually be very, very difficult to measure it in kind of any satisfying way. That said, I do think that the nature of the internet allows fandoms across the world to connect with each other in ways that maybe create this critical mass that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and for them to be maybe even a little bit more generative in good ways and bad. The bad is just banana pants conspiracy theories around celebrities, and the good is like making their own art, making friends, making sort of real social connections based on their love for a person or a thing. And so I feel like often with questions like these, my answers are not satisfying, but they're hopefully informative.
The Magical Overthinkers podcast is all about both and both and.
Okay,
so
good.
It's terrible for pull quotes. So I wonder, from your view, how has the role of celebrities in the lives of fans maybe changed since Beatlemania? Because even though the sort of like total sum of fanaticism and worship might not be materially different, I feel like the shape of it is somehow. And I feel like that has to do with our expectations of celebrities and the role that they play in so many corners of our lives now, in large part due to their presence on social media and our presence there. So yeah, do you think that celebrities play a different role in the lives of fans now than they did in the past? And what are we expecting now from them that's different?
I do think that there is a ubiquity issue. I am a neutral participant in the Great Swift Wars of 2023 and 2024. Like, I like her fine. I don't love her. I am not a Swiftie. I don't dislike her. Like, I don't have super strong feelings, but I did start to get very irritated at feeling like I just couldn't get away from her. Like, every news article, every story you walk into, and again, immeasurable. But I think just the way modern media and algorithms work, I think we all sort of face a ubiquity of celebrity that we maybe did not have before. I think our relationships, I mean, people have always had sort of parasocial relationships to famous people. I think the ability to know more about their lives has increased. And I think the expectation for them to take political stances, that feels like a last 15 or 20 years phenomenon. And certainly celebrities have always been political and taken political stances, but
The expectation.
the expectation that they will, and that those stances might be sort of countercultural. Obviously, during World War II, there was a huge effort to get celebrities to participate in war bonds, to work at the Hollywood canteen, like to be sort of publicly promoting the war effort at home, right? Now it's more grassroots. Certainly the government tries to get celebrities to sort of get behind whatever their issues are. And I think you definitely saw this during COVID, but I think it's more the public has particular expectations about celebrities taking certain stances on things.
Yes, that is a very good point, that we maybe now, for some reason, expect celebrities to stick it to the man, but they are the man.
They are the man. Absolutely.
Why would Taylor Swift stick it to the man? She is benefiting more than like 99.99999% of society from the very man.
Well, also it's like, she's not an underdog. I don't think she's ever been an underdog her whole life, which is fine. Not everybody needs to be an underdog. Some people are just dogs. I'm not an underdog.
Okay, this is so cringe, but I was watching the Dance Moms reunion the other week. Just let me have it. And I'm so sorry for anyone who has never seen it and doesn't know what I'm talking about. And I feel a lot of shame surrounding my interest in Dance Moms. But there was a part of the group interview where the producers were asking the cast to comment on this very extreme rivalry between two of the little girl dancers. And one of the questions about that rivalry was, why do you think people like an underdog? And JoJo Siwa actually provided an answer that I thought was smart. She said, I think people like a story. And an underdog provides narrative tension, like starting at the bottom, and there's hope that they'll rise to the top, and that's a narrative. And so, yeah, I think people maybe want to shoehorn a narrative that's satisfying to them and relatable to them into the stories of their favorite celebrities, even those that are truly not underdogs and are the man. I actually once had a Hollywood person who met Taylor Swift tell me that every girl in the world can be divided into either an Eponine or a Cosette, but some people are Eponines who think they're Cosettes, and some people are Cosettes who think they're Eponines, and Taylor Swift is a Cosette who thinks she's an Eponine.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I love Bravo. I hung out with my friend yesterday and we spent a solid, I want to say 20 minutes talking about the people on Vanderpump Rules and Summer House. I am not immune to the absolute joy of parasocial relationships. And I run into this a lot because I write a lot about mental health. And I think asking a teenager a question in 1990 and asking a teenager a question in 2024, you cannot measure the fact that the conversation around mental health in 1990 was wildly different than the conversation around mental health for teens in 2024. And there's kind of no way to gauge how that is affecting the answers. So there's just a lot of unmeasurable environmental differences when you're trying to talk about a huge topic like Americans' relationships to celebrities, right? And so you can sort of contour the shapes of it and what it looks like today, but doing that sort of like historical comparison is actually super thorny. You could also make the argument like there just was so much less media in 1968. So maybe your love for the Beatles, when there just was so much less, was even more intense.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you had less other stuff to fill your interest with if you wanted it.
I think that's what that Joe Coscarelli piece was kind of saying.
Yeah, exactly. I love Joe.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so true. I mean, yeah, the historical comparison is super tough because it's just so hard to control for a ton of factors.
Exactly.
But I wonder if the social media of it all, the online forum of it all, this ability to engage with your fandom so easily 24/7 has caused people to lose themselves in it a little bit more, because the connections that they're making are different from the connections that you might make going to a concert. Like, they're sort of illusory and can get really brutal.
And you can get down such a rabbit hole. I mean, I've been watching the Gilmore Girls with my older daughter. We're now on like our third rewatch. It's just our background in the living room. My younger daughter finds them so annoying, so she is usually asleep when this is happening. And my older daughter is like going and finding YouTube videos where people are doing commentary on how problematic Rory is.
My favorite critique of Rory, get this, my favorite critique by the youth, because there's this whole rewatch culture now around Gilmore Girls.
Yeah,
you're participating in it. My favorite critique of Rory is like, she has such main character energy. I'm like, she's not real. She's literally the main character in a fictional story.
She's literally the main character. But like, here are the two things where I am like, this is totally true. And these creators are right. And like, my daughter has very much latched onto this. Number one, both Rory and Lorelai are only really close friends with people that they can feel superior to.
Yeah.
And I was like, facts. And then the other is that Rory is an entitled millennial. And that is really, you need to also watch the reboot A Year in the Life to have the full Rory is an entitled millennial story. Sorry, that's a huge tangent, but yes.
Well, actually, these obsessive fan dynamics that we're alluding to, where even otherwise perfectly rational media consumers kind of suspend their disbelief too hard and end up forgetting that either TV fictions are not real life or that Taylor Swift is not your bestie. This is perfectly relevant because it connects to a question that I was planning to ask later, but I'm going to ask it now. So, a 2005 study published in the Psychology, Crime, and Law Journal identified 4 categories along the celebrity worship continuum. I'm going to define these categories, and then we could sort of talk about them, and I also have a silly question about them. So
I'm here for it.
The first category is called the entertainment social category, defined by sentiments like, my friends and I like to discuss what my favorite celebrity has done. And that's what you and I are kind of doing now. We're talking about JoJo Siwa. We're talking about the characters in Gilmore Girls as if they're real people, a little Delulu, but mostly accomplishing what Anne Helen Peterson has to say about talking about celebrities, which is it's a way of talking about things that matter to us without talking about ourselves. Then there's the second category called intense personal. And this is defined by frequent unprompted thoughts of their favorite celebrity. Sentiments include, I have thoughts about my favorite celebrity even when I don't want to. Then there is the borderline pathological category, which is defined by delusional thoughts, implausible expectations, self-sacrifice. Sentiments include, my favorite celebrity and I have our own code so we can communicate with each other secretly, and I would gladly die in order to save the life of my favorite celebrity. Okay, these are sentiments that people identified with, study participants. The final category is called deleterious imitation. And this is defined by a willingness to engage in illegal and or immoral behaviors for the fan's celebrity of choice. Sentiments include, if I were lucky enough to meet my favorite celebrity and they asked me to do something illegal as a favor, I would probably do it. So I have come across studies that suggest that young people are admiring public media figures like pop stars, actresses, athletes more than they did, say, 30 years ago. And more young people are entering some of these slightly scarier categories. Can you think of any stories that you've come across in your reporting that remind you of any of these categories?
I mean, I don't think you can have this discussion without talking about Donald Trump, right? Isn't January 6th the most intense form of celebrity worship that we have ever seen? How did we all get here? And people were ultimately breaking laws based on the narrative that had been spun by their favorite TV huckster. So I think that that's the most sort of obvious example.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at these symptoms, not only self-sacrifice, but the one about like my favorite celebrity and I have our own secret codes so we can communicate with each other secretly. Of course, there are like the Swiftie Easter eggs, but those are so innocuous compared to seeing hidden messages. Yeah.
Yeah. So QAnon is like that in some ways. I don't know that I have kind of seen it so much in my day-to-day life. Again, obviously I have a middle schooler and I have a second grader, and the kids' interest in Taylor Swift or Olivia Rodrigo or whoever does not seem kind of all that different from what I remember being so obsessed with New Kids on the Block. I remember one of my friends stealing a life-size cutout of Leonardo DiCaprio from our local video store in the Titanic era. And it lived in her room for the duration of our youth. So again, I don't think she was thinking about Leonardo DiCaprio to a deleterious extent. But like, all anecdotal, I would guess, educated guess, that the people who are sort of going off the deep end in terms of their love of a celebrity have probably other life issues, other things going on, a desire to escape from them, a lack of secure bonds in their own lives, which is a bummer, obviously.
For sure.
So, you know, I think if you are crossing the line, it's a symptom of other problems in your life and not necessarily the nature of modern celebrity.
Yeah. Other than the fact that celebrities are so much more accessible to us, that it's kind of easier than ever to imprint onto them to make up for some lack of resources in your real life community. And that actually leads me to want to make the point that celebrity worship is in so many ways defined by what teenagers are up to. Like, Beatlemania was as much a result of there being more teenagers in the US than ever, the baby boomer generation, as it was a result of sociopolitical tumult and desiring a new kind of paragon in celebrities. And I do have to wonder if parasocial dynamics on social media are more confusing and if tensions among fandoms are more intense if you are a person who doesn't yet have a fully formed prefrontal cortex or more experience navigating conflict. I remember when I was a teenager, I was really looking forward to being in my 30s. I just had this impulse that my 30s would be my glory days. And I gotta tell you something, I am loving them, except for one small thing. I do not like all of the doctor's appointments that I have to book. At least I didn't like having to book them before I discovered ZocDoc. I have been a ZocDoc user since long before they sponsored Magical Overthinkers. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care to skincare, and much more. I'm very picky with my doctors because I got that medical anxiety. I don't like to do it, and I don't like to get on the phone. But with ZocDoc, you don't have to worry about it. You just book the appointment online, easy peasy. You show up. Every doctor I've found on ZocDoc has been professional. Sometimes they give me compliments, bedside manner, chef's kiss. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. Again, I use ZocDoc. I really recommend it to you too. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/magical to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/magical. ZocDoc.com/magical. In my new book, I do mention this correlation that certain studies have found connecting a lack of IRL connection and so-called positive stressors from young people's real-life parental figures and communities and tendencies towards celebrity stalking. So that was correlated. And I try to make this point in the book that the fact that the mainstreaming of using familial language like mother to refer to female pop stars and actresses, which is, by the way, a slang pattern that stems from queer ballroom culture, this idea of IRL chosen family, house mothers who could be there for you even if your birth family couldn't. And all of this maternal language that's emerged surrounding celebrities is not just a bit. It has to do with a sort of longing for parental nurturing and how we're projecting those needs in a lopsided fashion onto these famous surrogate mommies. You write a lot about motherhood and mental health. And I'm wondering if you've noticed any patterns or shifts in young people's relationships with their IRL parental figures and communities that could explain this wave of intense fan dynamics.
I think it's such a mixed bag in general. People are closer to their parents than they were in previous generations. There seems like more of an openness between parents and children, I think, than there possibly had been previously. But there, again, is more pressure to have your celebrities align with your values and have them be on the record as saying certain things or not saying certain things. And to bring it back to Taylor Swift, I remember writing a piece in 2014. It was for Elle magazine about how just stop asking Taylor Swift if she's a feminist. Whether she is or she's not, if she doesn't want to define herself that way, bullying people into using a term for themselves that they're not actively using, let her be, like that. She doesn't owe you that. So I do think that there is more of a sense of like, I am buying a ticket to your concert. I am watching your show. I am taking an action or putting money into your coffers. And so therefore you owe me X.
Yeah.
And I do think that that is new. The idea that a celebrity who doesn't know me owes me something beyond just the performance that I have paid for, right?
Yeah.
And I find that to be really unfair to them. Like, if I buy a ticket to a Taylor Swift concert, I expect a great Taylor Swift performance. She owes the audience that. Beyond that, she does not owe the audience access into her inner thoughts and lives beyond what she wants to share.
Right.
And I believe that quite deeply.
Yeah. And I mean, a fan can choose what they want to do based on their feelings about a celebrity for any reason. But yes, this expectation of exchange that goes beyond the thing that we showed up for does feel like an intensifying product of this time. I was actually just having a conversation about this last night with another guest from a Magical Overthinkers episode who's become a friend. She's a feminist philosopher. And she's really cool. And we were talking about a couple of things. First of all, like, there's a conversation to be had about, like, to whom do we owe our time, attention, care, loyalty, empathy, generosity the most? And for a celebrity, it's like, well, they're a human being. So in theory, like, they owe their time, generosity, empathy, nurturing, whatever, like all these very, very human things to the people who are close to them in their lives. It's just the same way that any of us do, not to strangers en masse. And yet these parasocial dynamics, I truly believe because of social media, have suggested that she really knows you the way that you know her. She is Mother. That like she owes you, or any celebrity owes you, this sort of time and vulnerability and whatever that they would owe a close loved one. And I find that fascinating and a little scary. And then the other piece of it, in terms of like speaking out publicly about politics, whatever, things that are outside of a celebrity's expertise, but, you know, we shouldn't have to be experts in certain matters to speak out about them. Like, if so, then grassroots movements would never happen. But I do think it's funny that we're missing this like critical conversation about how a person's voice is defined by their usage of a social media platform owned by a massive tech company. So it's like someone is only vocalizing to your liking if they have posted on this platform that is inherently addictive, that is like exploiting your time, hormones, money. I find that all such a clusterfuck.
I feel no one should be compelled to speak. I think that's really different from saying, if you feel compelled to speak, you should absolutely speak. So it's not saying like, oh, just shut up and dribble, which is what people, you know, often say to sports players.
Athletes,
professional athletes who speak out. Yeah. So it's like saying, if you feel compelled to speak, you should speak, but you should not be bullied. You're just expecting that the people in power are going to be on your side. And often they won't be.
Well, because the result of, you know, demanding political vocalizations from celebrities can range from Jane Fonda to Ronald Reagan. Like,
right.
So it's like, be careful what you wish for. I don't know. That brings me to one last question, and then we're going to get into a bit of a lightning round.
Okay.
And this question also is perfectly related to the topic at hand. I interviewed Anne Helen Peterson the other week for a different subject. I talked to her about trad wives, but she reminded me that there's always a sort of moral panic whenever celebrities start to occupy spaces that were once deemed inappropriate for them. Like the example that she gave to me was when TV stars started appearing in movies. People thought it was like the death of the elevated cinematic form. But this is totally opinion. Do you think that there are arenas that entertainers should fundamentally not occupy?
That's such a good question. I would not say that blanketly because I would say nearly a free speech absolutist. I just think like when we start saying like, oh, somebody shouldn't say something about something else, I never want to make those blanket statements. So I would say that first. But I will say that I am often very disappointed and upset about when celebrities speak about health topics and often say things that are potentially very dangerous. An example I think about a lot, again, revealing myself to be the garbage monster that I am. Kristen Cavallari, lately she's been talking about how you don't need sunscreen, nobody needs sunscreen. And it's like, listen, do you know people with family histories of melanoma? Like, who some people really do need sunscreen.
Kristen Cavallari, for anyone mentally well enough not to know who that is an early 2000s reality TV star known for shows like Laguna Beach and The Hills on MTV, who grew up to be basically a full-blown anti-vax conspiritualist type.
And I remember very vividly, like 10 years ago, she gave People magazine a recipe for goat's milk formula. Now, formula is one of the most highly regulated products on the market because we're talking about infants, and you want to make sure that what you're giving infants is nutritionally sound and like meets their very specific nutritional needs. And the backlash was so severe that people actually, I believe, retracted or deleted that recipe. So I'm not saying like, let's go out here and censor Kristen Cavallari. It's a free country. She can say whatever she wants, but I wish that she wouldn't. I wish people who without medical degrees or deep knowledge in the nutritional space would learn more before. And again, it's like in terms of sowing distrust of, the measles vaccine, like celebrities have played a huge role in that, which I don't love, would prefer polio not return to our shores. So, I mean, and look at, RFK Jr. is basically the anti-vaccine candidate. Like,
yeah.
Or he would say vaccine skeptical. He does not align with the term anti-vaxxer, so I do not want to.
Oh, yeah, let's validate him for sure.
Let's validate him. But on the other hand, again, it's like this stuff is complicated. Katie Couric getting a colonoscopy on air measurably got more people to get colonoscopies.
Yeah.
Like, that matters. Like, that stuff is important.
But then again, now I'm thinking about like the stick it to the man thing. Getting a colonoscopy, that's so the man. You know what I mean? Being anti-vax is stick it to the man. And so there's something attractive about wherever you fall along the political horseshoe, there is just something more attractive about that underdog, stick it to the man perspective.
It's true. Although the drugs that you get when you get a colonoscopy are amazing.
Oh my God, I've heard. I am so jealous.
It's a horrible process. It feels horrible. I'm so glad I don't have to do it again for 10 years. But my husband said that when he came to get me, he was there when I came out of the sedation, and he was like, you look more relaxed than I have seen you look in 5 years. So
yeah,
maybe colonoscopies aren't the man if you get amazing
you use them right.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've heard all about those colonoscopy drugs. One day
you'll get there. It's a real roller coaster of a process.
Alrighty, now we are going to get into some thought spirals that were submitted by the Magical Overthinkers Club, our listeners who flock to Instagram to commiserate in overthinking. So I am going to read to you a sort of lightning round sequence of irrational thought spirals and questions, overthinky thoughts that were submitted by listeners on the topic of celebrity worship. And I'm going to ask you to sort of gut react to them. Do you agree? Do you think the sentiment is true? Is it reasonable? Don't overthink it. Thought spiral number 1. Have celebrities replaced the god and goddess figures of mythology and religion?
For some, probably.
Here's a good one, because it involves that familial language that we were talking about, but in a different way. As a Swiftie, I'm guilty of celebrity worship, but I'm a few years older, and I always saw her as a little sister figure in my life. Have you noticed this protective attitude that Swifties have toward Taylor?
I know a lot of middle-aged women who love Taylor, so I haven't framed it that way, but I could see that maybe they think of her as a daughter figure for sure. And I say that as a fellow middle-aged woman. I am middle-aged. It's not pejorative.
I don't think of it as pejorative. I obviously aspire to be middle-aged one day.
Well, so I did this long story last year about millennials at middle-aged, and many of them were very offended by thinking that elder millennials were middle-aged. And I'm like, girl, we're 40.
Yeah.
Now we're 42. I'm the oldest. I'm born in 82. So elder millennial.
I mean, this is going to be fucking corny. Did Kristen Cavallari say this? But we should all be grateful that we get to be middle-aged. What's the alternative?
Totally. I love it. I love being in my 40s. It's the best.
I love having people that I admire who have to do it first. It's like Miranda July is now 50. So now I don't have to be so scared.
There you go.
Next thought spiral. Do parasocial relationships bring the same dopamine boost as real ones?
No. I don't think they do because they're one way. And I think to have a real relationship, you need to have a two-way relationship. But I do think that they can, as we discussed, and you discussed with the wonderful Anne Helen, when we talk about them with our real life friends, they can be a nice glue. Like I said, 20 minutes with my pal yesterday just talking about Carl and Lindsay's breakup and all the garbage men of Vanderpump Rules and what are they doing? Like a great time.
I mean, I'm no neuroscientist, but maybe like if you were blessed enough to get, say, a like on your comment by the celebrity that you love themselves, that would probably give you like a dopamine boost. But it's super short-lived. It's like a sugar crash, you know? Like it's not that sort of sustaining contentment, that nourishing that you get from real relationships. And now that I think about it, I actually did come across some neuroscience research for my book saying that the constant stream of teeny tiny dopamine hits that you get from your smartphone can diminish your ability to appreciate beauty and novelty IRL. So there is that. The next overthinky thought says, how do you find the line between admiring a public figure and acknowledging that they're just a person?
It's hard. And it's why so many people sort of get let down by people that they admire. There's so many musicians or artists that I think are great that I really never want to meet them in real life. Because I just admire their work so much and I don't want the work to be damaged at all by like a bad in-person interaction. So it's not like I spend my time thinking about them. I think mostly with musicians because I'm like, your music to me is so pure. I don't really think about you as a person that much. It's just like I love listening to it. It provides me sort of solace, excitement, whatever, entertainment. And so if you meet the musician and they suck, I don't want the music to get ruined for me forever.
Yeah, keep some things precious, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like lowering our expectations of literally everyone.
For sure. Managed expectations is the key to happiness in life.
The next thought spiral asks, the death threats on a celebrity's behalf. What the fuck? What possesses people?
So I think that the bar to death threats is just super low now. Like nobody actually like means them. I get death threats. Who doesn't get death threats? People have lost their minds. They don't think the internet is real. And so they just say horrible things. And that's why I think it is so important to teach children media literacy. Death threats are bad. You shouldn't do them for anybody.
Right. Even if you don't mean them, you shouldn't do them.
Most people don't mean them. They don't mean them literally.
Yeah. It's like when you say something a little bit snarky on the internet, it's like you would never say that in real life. Certainly if you threaten to murder someone on the internet, you would not do that. It's a lot to murder someone.
Right. So I just think in general, stand culture aside, the bar to making a death threat on the internet is simply too low.
Yeah. And it's like a little bit of a brag to be like, yeah, and after my viral article, I just got death threats.
Exactly.
It does still feel bad. I mean, I don't fucking wood, but
enjoy them. Don't get me wrong. It's not a good time, but it's like, I just don't think you can really take them seriously anymore.
Okay. Next thought spiral. Why do I want to be a celebrity / famous so bad, despite hating capitalism and consumerism?
Most people want to be valued and loved. I don't identify with this commenter because the idea of strangers recognizing me, perceiving me, makes me want to crawl under a blanket for the rest of my life. But I think everyone wants to be praised. Everyone wants to be validated. And modern celebrity, I think, is a very obvious way to get those things in life. But like, I was just watching the Carter family documentary. I can't remember what it's called, but it's about Nick and Aaron Carter.
Mm-hmm.
It is the darkest thing. It's so upsetting. It's so bleak. And the after effects of, I mean, it's like, I feel like every famous person in the 90s now, just like there's all these stories of how corrosive and horrible it was for them.
Yeah. I think some have this sort of exceptionalist delulu. You know, if you like text and drive a little tiny bit, you're like, okay, but I'm not going to die.
Right.
I think maybe there's some of that with the celebrity thing. It's like, well, let me have a crack at it. Like, I don't think I'll end up in a ditch, you know?
Right. I think you need to have a very deep and strong grounding in life to be able to handle it. I think it is really, really difficult for a lot of people. Like a lot of people. I like watched one episode of D'Amelio sisters.
Me too. I watched one episode.
They seemed so sad, honestly. Like, it did not seem like they were having a good time. And it really bummed me out because they're young girls and, like, they should be having a good time, being cute.
Totally.
dancing on the internet. So I just don't think really mega fame, obviously a lot of perks, all the money and adulation, probably great. But to me, like, I just see the downsides. I mean, it's hard enough to like get through the day feeling good about yourself as a normie. Just like,
I know. I'm just like, you don't want to be famous. You want to be rich.
Honestly, to me, that is absolutely living the dream. It's just like being
faceless
off social media.
I know.
Faceless, very wealthy. Like, that's, to me, that I get for sure.
I know. I'm like so jealous of execs that nobody knows their name, but they have so much power and they're so wealthy. I'm not really jealous. Like, I'm fine, but they're doing
it right. A thing I think about a lot is that I think actually the ultimate privilege is total privacy. Not just like, oh, are you putting your stuff on social media? It's more like we're surveilled in ways. Like, this is where I get very tinfoil hatty. And I just did this series on educational technology and Chromebooks in schools. And the lack of privacy that kids have today, because they have to kind of immediately consent to having all of their data used by these big corporations, I find totally disturbing. And so I think sort of, especially as we sort of keep progressing down this path, total privacy will be the ultimate luxury.
Yeah. Well, if that's the metric, then celebrities are downright oppressed.
Wouldn't go that far, but yes, I think that there are serious downsides to being that public. But some people love it. Like, I don't know. I'm saying I'm mildly introverted, and the idea of like being perceived by strangers is just like horrible to me.
So let's just do one more thought spiral. Why do people feel that celebrities aren't allowed to be sad or complain? Why don't people seem to think that celebrities, whoa, crazy, this is truly like the last thought spiral, deserve privacy?
They are human beings. I think that there's something profoundly dehumanizing about being a celebrity, because you are no longer a person, you're a symbol to people. They make their own meaning out of you, which is fine. That's their right. They can have their private relationship with you. But then just expecting them to behave a certain way, like they're a puppet, like, no, they're just a person like you and me. It's all the same. They're probably better looking, and that's fine. But like,
well, like they paid a lot of money for it. So
right. But it's sort of just like, ultimately, no one can live up to an expectation of perfection. Absolutely no one. And a million people will have a million different ideas about how you should behave.
You know what? Speaking of that expectation of perfection, I just like, not to get like this, but it brings me back again to like the misaligned expectations for female celebrities versus male celebrities. Like, I think female celebrities are expected to be more moral and more stick it to the man and more activist-y. It's like, why aren't we demanding political vocalizations from Daniel Day-Lewis? You know,
there's this amazing, very large academic tome that I recommend whenever I talk about celebrity, called The Frenzy of Renown. And the author's name is Leo Browdy. The theory is basically a celebrity scandal only sticks if it goes against whatever their brand is. So someone who has a reputation of being like a charming rogue, they can have a lot of naughty things that they did, bad things that they did, and they can be redeemed because no one had that high of an expectation of their behavior in the first place. And so I think it's sort of, most female celebrities do not have that lane of misbehavior in the same way. If you think of someone like Robert Downey Jr., who like obviously had his struggles, and like it's great that he's doing so much better now and was able to sort of rebuild his life. But like, would a female celebrity of that era be able to have rebuilt a career in the same way?
Right.
If you look at Brad Pitt, and listen, I'm a Brad Pitt fan, but the allegations against him has been like Teflon. Nothing has stuck to that man. And again, I think the expectations for just women's behavior in general are so much more stringent. Like, the discourse around Anne Hathaway has just been so bananas. We are almost exactly the same age. And I feel of two minds about her. Because first of all, it's like, oh, she's too hot to like be 40 or whatever. That's insulting, first of all. But then it's like, on the other hand, it's also so ageist to expect that all of us look like, I don't look as good as Anne Hathaway. I never looked as good.
No one does.
You know what I mean? It all is part of the same trap. of having to look a certain way or you're supposed to behave a certain way. You know what I mean? Like every part of it is just gross.
Yeah. Like the culture turned on Anne Hathaway because she was too perfect. Like you can't win.
You can't win. You absolutely can't win. You can even be like the most beautiful 41-year-old in America, and that's still somehow a problem for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. I have to admit that when I was younger, and I think this had to do with her performance in Les Mis, I was such a hater when it came to Anne Hathaway. I would never post about it on the internet, but like deep within my soul, I was like mad at her. And then I think I realized that it's because I admire her. And I too am an earnest theater kid. And so I hated myself.
The narcissism of small differences is real. It's very, very real.
That's a soundbite. Thank God. All right. My very last question for you is, what is the one thing about celebrity worship that you think people are overthinking the most? And what's the one thing that they're underthinking the most?
I think you can just enjoy a celebrity. I don't think you need to co-sign everything they've ever said or done. Like you can just delight in them. Can't we just have joy in stuff that we like? I mean, I had a really long conversation yesterday with a friend about how much I love the movie Zodiac. And I wish more people talked about.
I like that movie a lot.
It's a very long movie. And that's very off-brand for me. Usually I don't want my movies to be any longer than 90 minutes. So I think it's like you can have unexamined joy in a cultural product sometimes. Like it doesn't always have to be like, but is it problematic? It's like maybe it's okay. It's just okay to enjoy something and like that's fine. What are we underthinking? I think we're underthinking the amount of power that the top 0.0001% of celebrities have in the world and how potentially terrifying that is. And I think about that with someone like Elon Musk, who is legitimately so powerful and so rich and has an army of fans that will defend him and explain away sort of any sort of antisocial, terrible behavior that he exhibits. And so I think that is obviously something that is often examined, but like we could do some more examining of that.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. This has been a delight.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
If folks want to keep up with you and your writing, where can they do that?
NewYorkTimes.com. I write a newsletter, but it almost always goes on the site. But you should subscribe to my newsletter at the Times. If you just Google Jessica Grose, Grose newsletter, you will find it and you can subscribe. So that's probably the best way.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, so much for being here. Now's the time where I present a little tidbit of evidence-based advice for how we chronically online overthinkers can get out of our own heads this week. This is one that I learned from a psychologist named Ethan Kross, author of a 2021 book about overthinking called Chatter, in an interview that he did with Columbia Magazine. And it has to do with a simple little technique involving distanced self-talk. I thought this was really interesting. Ethan told Columbia Magazine, quote, "Deliberate self-reflection can help us solve problems, make better decisions, and gain wisdom. But there's a lot of research that shows that when we are under stress, introspection can actually do more harm than good. Our inner voice can indulge in a lot of judgment. We think about that screw up at work or that fight with a loved one or that brutal fight we had with a fellow Swiftie in a fan forum. And we can end up flooded by how bad we feel. Then we think about it again and again. This type of repetitive negative thought, which I call mental chatter, concentrates our attention on our emotional distress and can send us into a downward spiral," unquote. Ethan calls that mental chatter a threat to our confidence, a saboteur. Ethan said that there are studies to show that it can lead to students performing worse on tests, athletes to beef their athletic performance. It can screw up romantic relationships. It can undermine your physical health. This chatter is no joke. One of the remedies to interrupt these thought spirals that he mentioned was engaging in this distanced self-talk, aka silently referring to yourself in the third person. It sounds simple, it sounds silly, but Ethan said, for example, I can often snap myself out of chatter by saying, "Come on, Ethan." He said it's also helpful to put myself in the role of a good friend giving advice. And this is a mental exercise I sometimes engage in. I think it's pretty common. You ask yourself, would I talk to a friend the way that I'm talking to myself right now? And I guess If you add in some of this distanced self-talk, it can give you a moment of clarity, just enough to interrupt that chatter. Thank you, listeners, so much again for being here. And until the next thought spiral, remember, think it over. Just don't overthink it. Magical Overthinkers was created and hosted by Amanda Montell and edited by Jordan Moore of The Pod Cabin. Our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our magical manager, Katie Epperson, coordinator, Reese Oliver, and Network Studio 71. Be sure to follow the pod on Instagram at Magical Overthinkers. We're also on YouTube, link in show notes, and ad-free episodes as well as behind-the-scenes extras are available on the Magical Overthinkers Substack at amandamontell.substack.com.